Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Fagelubi with this OmniED Brief. In this short video, we'll be talking about using data to make decisions, with a specific focus on how we can use error patterns in student work to drive our instructional decision making. When we do this, when we use error patterns in our work, we're able to better target our instruction to meet the needs of our students, help those students who are falling behind, and make our time more efficient. Let's take a look at what we can do. First, let's start with looking at individual student data. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a class of 20 or 25 or 30 students. What we want to do is start off by collecting that work, whatever that measure is that you've given, get it all together, get it organized, and begin to look at one student at a time. It doesn't matter if it's reading or math, or in this case, I'm going to use writing as an example. But let's take a look at that data. In step one, we review the first student's data. Now, review the data for what once I've got it organized? Well, step two, and we've created one here at the bottom of the page for you, is we've actually created a series of checkboxes with common errors in this particular area. So I'm working on writing with my second grade students. I've got common errors in spelling, capitalization, punctuation. Sometimes there's syntax and semantics. So I know that those common errors are things that I can look for in the data that I've collected, the writing samples that I've got from the students. But I also know there are some things that as each unit goes by, I want to focus on over time. So you'll notice on the right-hand side, I've got these other categories where I'm going to work on sentence complexity because that's something this time I want to really focus on. So if step one is looking at an individual student, step two tells me what am I looking for. By adding in simple checkboxes, I can actually move pretty quickly through looking at the student's data to identify patterns of error that they may have. Ideally, I would have several sentences from the student, or I've actually got work where we have several months of data from students, and we can look through those to get a sense of what are the patterns of error. Step three, at the bottom of my sheet here, I've got a place where I can summarize instructional goals. I want to put in writing for myself what is a clear objective or a clear goal for the student to work on next. If I'm seeing lots of spelling errors or lots of capitalization errors, we have lots of kids who use capitalization in the middle of words, not at appropriate places, then I can target those as the next place of instruction for this particular kid. Finally, step four, I repeat the steps for each of the students in my class. But in this way, I do a deep dive on every kid that I'm looking at. And I have a nice sheet individualized to that kid that I can hand back, or maybe I can use in communication with the parents. Helps me stay organized. It will help me to think about the individual student. Now, for a lot of us, we want to think about the whole class. So how do I aggregate this data? How do I put it all together to know what I do for the whole group of students, maybe targeted group of students who don't seem to be getting a key idea, or individual students that may really be falling behind or need some sort of intervention? Well, that's why I go to the next step, where I look at a class-wide data set. And I can reflect now that I've analyzed the individual students, and I do three things. I create a summary sheet for myself where on that sheet I've identified those same checkbox areas. You can see them on the right-hand side there. And I ask myself to do a few things to get a plan for how I'm going to approach this with my whole class. First, step one, I note the class variability. How is my class doing? Is my range of data quite wide, or am I actually getting the students to be pretty close? Most of us will have very heterogeneous classes. That means our student performance is all over the place. That tells us that we need to differentiate instruction, right? Well, that's why we did the individual analysis, and we'll get there in a second. Step two of my planning process here in my class-wide reflection. I want to review each of the category of class-wide common errors, the ones that I determined the checkboxes with. So let's take spelling as an example. And I want to note in my individual data how many students had this box checked. And that's really nice because it's objective. I don't have to think back, well, I kind of think some students are struggling with that, or maybe it's a few students, or it's half my students. No, I just look back at the individual summary sheets and I can see where that's a priority area of need. Then what I do is I go to my summary sheet and I check the box of what % of my students need to work on that area. And that's where if I use the RTI, the response to instruction, or MTSS, multi-tiered system of support way of thinking, I begin to identify that if more than 20% of my students are in need of an area, if I've checked off enough boxes where more than 20% of my students need that work, that's time for whole group instruction. If it's only 5 to 15% of students who need that area, I'm going to think about targeted small group instruction. I'm going to use my centers and stations to deliver that supplemental instruction. If I have about less than 5% of my students struggling with a really particular area. Now I know I need individual support, whether it's with the help of a reading specialist, a paraprofessional in my classroom. Maybe it's just me and I'm going to do it through working stations and individual time. But I want to begin to prioritize the red areas or individual areas of growth, yellow, targeted areas of growth, and green, the areas that I know the whole class needs to be focused on as I reflect on how to spend my time. That's going to help me prioritize and make better decisions with the time that I have with the students. So these two different ways of thinking about individual data and group data, and following the 4 steps for individual data and the 3 steps for class-wide reflection, allow me to be more efficient with my time. This short video has talked about using data to make decisions by using error patterns to drive instruction. We hope this video has been helpful for you, and you'll go to OmniED for more. Thanks.